So yes, an object at rest will tend to stay at rest until forced upon by an outside force, until acted upon by an outside force. But we cannot wait for an outside force to come along and spirit us off the couch and into motion. That's not going to work for us. And if that's been you, if you've been in that position, you know that it's a complete waste of time, energy, and life force to wait for somebody to come along and save your ass. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody. It is on all of us to have that ability to get up on our own feet, dust ourselves off, and get into that forward motion. What's up, my friends? JT DeBolt with you today for the True Driven Podcast, the podcast for the few, the true, the driven, those of us that call ourselves and each other the True Driven. And I say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever time it is for you, no matter where you might be tuning in from on the Big Blue Marble. Thanks as always for joining me here for the True Driven Podcast. And for those of you who are brand new here, thank you for the follow. Thank you for subscribing, especially here on YouTube, youtube.com/JT DeBolt. Of course, you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Biggest thing, and the reason I push the YouTube channel is that gives me the opportunity to come at you not just in video form, but there's also going to be more updates to the message, things that you as True Drivens are going to need to know, further resources to help you propagate and move forward on your journey and build that momentum. And momentum is actually the topic for today. We're going to be talking about how to build it, how to create it, how to sustain it, and really what it is. And I think a really powerful visual or a metaphor, if you will, for what momentum actually is to really go back to high school physics. For those of us who didn't particularly love school, let alone high school, or even physics, this may be a little bit of a painful reminder, but if you'll just stick with me for just a moment, I think you'll find some value in this. Because when we talk about building momentum in our careers, building momentum in our businesses, especially you entrepreneurs out there, you know that momentum is a very precious thing and it can be fleeting. And so often, I think the impression is you'll look at somebody who's got a measure of success, a measure of results, whether that's in their business or otherwise, and think, well, that's the way it's always been. And now that they've attained that level of proficiency, that level of success, those results, then that's the rest of their life. And then they lived happily ever after, so to speak. But for those of you who have been in the game long enough, you know that anything measurable, anything that is worth getting after, those big missions in business and life, you realize that not only is it very difficult to break the inertia of mediocrity and start to create that forward momentum, it can be very difficult to maintain that momentum if you let your foot off the gas, if you get complacent, if you fall asleep at the wheel. Today, we're going to explore a little bit about this concept of momentum. And again, I want to kind of take us back to high school physics. Now think about this. You remember Newton's first law states an object in motion tends to stay in motion, or an object at rest will tend to stay at rest until acted upon by an outside force. And of course, I'm paraphrasing this, but you get the idea. What does that even imply if we just think about Newton's first law of physics? It implies that anything that's sitting still and stagnant, or just basically inert, is going to stay there unless an outside force acts upon it. And that sounds real cool if you're thinking about science and you're thinking about physics, but that can't actually apply to us as sovereign human beings, especially as leaders. You True Drivens realize that your inner drive is the actual mechanism that creates the break from inertia and the creation of and the propulsion of the momentum that we're seeking. We have to be willing to take that first step, and that is to recognize that we are not where we want to be. Now, You may not be where you want to be financially. You may not be where you want to be professionally. You may not be where you want to be physically with your fitness, your health, and so on. You may not be where you want to be with your relationships. There's a myriad of things in our lives that we can look at and say, hey, this is not really working out the way I want it to. I believe that's one of the most important realizations that we can have as leaders, is to be able to look ourselves in the eye, to be able to say with critical thought and from a place of evaluation, not from a place of self-judgment, that this is not working for me. I want better. I want more. And I'm going to go all in and count myself in as a competitor in order to actually achieve the things that I want for my life. You guys remember there's an episode I did a while back on what would your life look like? What would happen if you went all in on yourself? That was, as you recall, a call to action. I wanted you guys to be thinking in terms of what's possible for you if you were to allow yourself to strip away all the bullshit, all of the stories and all of the lies that you've been told and continue to believe in and listen to, and play the game as if you had nothing to lose. To play the game as if the clock was running out, because it is on all of us. We have no idea how much time we have left in this thing we call life. That specific episode was designed not just to be a call to arms and a call to action, but also a reminder of how important and how precious life is, but also our responsibility as leaders to show up each and every single day and give the best that we can with what we have. If you've got a full gas tank, you give all of it. If you've got a half a gas tank, you run it dry. The point being is that there's never a specific or perfect time to be taking action or doing the thing you need to do. The only time is now. That's what that whole episode was about. And as I promised, I was going to talk more about this concept of building momentum. Momentum is an interesting thing because you can look at anybody that's at any point in their life, and a lot of times some of the most inspiring success stories that you look at, you just look around, think of the people that you look up to, think about the people that you see as the champions of business, life, whatever, sports, whatever industry it might be. You'll find that a lot of times those people came from parts chapters of their stories that were anything but inspiring. In many cases, they came from heartbreak. They came from potentially, being bankrupt or broke. They came from a very severe case of self-doubt, insecurity. These were not people that were just hatched or born with this booming sense of self, this booming sense of confidence, this booming skill level, and then just sort of just hit the ground running. That's not even close to how most, in fact, I can't think of one person right now that I would look to and say that person is a paragon of success, a champion of momentum, and say that they themselves actually qualify on that merit because they were born that way. And if you can think of one, I'd love to see you throw it in the chat and throw it in the comments and let me know if you can find one person who was just born with instant momentum and maintained it throughout life with very little to no input to continue that. It's going to be almost impossible to do, right? So what does that tell us? That tells us that even if you're going through a time right now where you feel stuck, stagnated, maybe you're not exactly where you want to be, maybe you're not anywhere close, that does not mean that that has to be the rest of your life. That does not have to be the final chapter of your story. It's up to you right now. It's up to all of us as true drivens to recognize that we may not be where we want to be. We may not be at the level of skill, proficiency, personal excellence that we strive and want to be at. And that is part of the process. It's okay to be there. It's not okay to stay there. This is a very important realization. So if we go back and we look at that Newtonian physics, that first law, it says that a body in motion will tend to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. We'll get to that in a second, because there are plenty of those forces that will act upon you once you get yourself in motion. But the most important thing is to get yourself in motion. Now, I will say this, having been a person, and I'll just be real, I have gone through many chapters of my life, some of them small, some of them large, where I felt completely stuck, where it felt like there was no hope, where it felt like I had reached the pinnacle. Maybe my best days are behind me. You ever had that experience, or where you feel like you're no longer in your prime? You hear this a lot. Guys, I know you probably feel this at times as well, especially the men in the audience here. You guys that have been with me long enough and listened to me talk about the power of masculinity and this bullshit notion of toxic masculinity, which there is no such thing. It's very easy to feel like if I'm not operating at full capacity, if I'm not hitting on all 12 cylinders, if I'm not full afterburner all the time, 24/7, 365, somehow I'm not good enough or I'm not doing well enough. But this feeling isn't just for men. Women can feel this as well. Women, you know this. You have probably experienced this in one chapter of your life or another where you feel like, man, maybe my best days are behind me. My most creative days, my most physically fit days, my strongest days, my most emotionally stable days. The days where I've got solutions and I have the ability to create solutions even in the face of extreme challenges. Those days have left me behind. The answer is no, they have not. The answer is your best days could still be in front of you. Your best days are created in the now, not the past, and certainly not hoping for them in the future. We have to first realize if we are stuck, if we are stagnated, if we are inert, that is indeed the case, but that is not where we have to stay. It might be very disappointing. You may have been at the top of your game and gotten knocked off the proverbial horse, and now you're feeling that disappointment. You're feeling that heaviness, the weight of knowing that you have to get yourself back up off the ground, dust yourself off, get back in the saddle, and get going again. And just that alone can feel like the weight of the world pressing down on you, keeping you stuck. It's the type of force that makes you want to hit the snooze button in the morning, that makes you want to not go to the gym, that makes you want to do nothing but veg out, Netflix, chill, whatever it might be, or just simply give in to life altogether. But quitting is not an option. Failure is an option. We've talked about failure and how to deal with failure in past episodes here. Quitting is not an option for us true drivens. One foot in front of the other. And if you think about the simplicity of just that one statement alone, one foot in front of the other, that is literally all it takes to create and maintain momentum. So yes, an object at rest will tend to stay at rest until forced upon by an outside force, until acted upon by an outside force. But we cannot wait for an outside force to come along and spirit us off the couch and into motion. That's not going to work for us. And if that's been you, if you've been in that position, you know that it's a complete waste of time, energy, and life force to wait for somebody to come along and save your ass. Nobody is coming to save you. Nobody. It is on all of us to have that ability to get up on our own feet, dust ourselves off, and get into that forward motion. So let's say this. Let's say that you've been in that situation. You've had to get yourself up off the couch. You've had to get yourself back in the game, whether that was back in the game of life, back in the game of business, back in the game of love, get back in the game of fitness, whatever that might be. That can be a very difficult thing until you actually do it. It's the thought, oftentimes, of doing the difficult part that is harder than the act of actually doing it. Great example of this, if you've ever done a cold plunge. The thought and the buildup to it is way more difficult and oftentimes much more daunting and painful than the actual act of getting into the cold water. Yeah, I know the first few seconds are awful, but once you're actually in it, you start to, kind of get into the flow, if you will, build the momentum, and there you are doing the difficult thing. Embracing the suck is actually the hardest part, is the embracing part. It's the realization that A, it sucks, and B, you're going to do this. That decision, just those two parts, could be the most difficult part of it, is to be able to say to yourself, okay, that thing, that difficult, challenging, daunting, maybe intimidating thing is what I'm going to do. Noticing that it's difficult, noticing that it's hard, noticing that it's intimidating is the first part. Being real with yourself, grounded in it, and willing to accept that this is going to suck. And then finding the enthusiasm for it. Finding the gratitude for yourself for having the fucking balls to take something on that's challenging. All of that is an act of breaking the inertia and getting into motion. You are actually building momentum. And if you don't believe it, think of it like this. Going back to high school physics, the mathematical equation for linear momentum. It's very simple. Momentum equals mass times velocity. That's it. Linear momentum. That's the mathematical equation for it. So if you think about it, there's really only two components to building linear momentum. Mass and velocity. So if something is moving along, but it's just kind of, trodden along, if you increase either the mass or the velocity, momentum will increase. And vice versa. If you decrease either of those, the momentum will decrease as well. Now, I'm not going to get into all of this from a scientific standpoint. I want to simply use it as an illustration for you to think about your own goals, your own mission, as you build that vision that you have for yourself, for your life, you true drivens out there. Think of it this way. If you're not where you want to be right now, but you are in forward motion, if you want to increase your momentum, you need only increase one of two things, or both, either the mass or the velocity, or you can increase both. I don't recommend increasing both at the same time, because let's bring it down to practicality. Let's talk about the human factor of life, living life, not the mathematical equation for momentum. I'm talking about what we as leaders encounter on a daily basis. Which one is more applicable? Which one is the one that we have the most control over, the most influence over? Is it the speed at which things happen? Or is it the amount of effort we can put into it? Think about that. Put it in the comments. Because my challenge to you is to start thinking about the missions that you're on right now. If you are not getting the traction that you want, if you're not getting the results you want, rather than obsessing over the results, remember what the results are, but obsess over the action, the actual application that is required to get the results, the force, if you will, right? I'm going to use a word and then we're going to have to go define it, but I'm not going to get into that. In other words, think of it this way. If we go back to the equation for momentum, it's either mass or velocity. If we obsess over velocity, we're talking about time. We're talking about speed. We're talking about a lot of things that may or may not be 100% within our locus of control. As leaders, we can't be worried about, is this thing going to happen? If I act faster, if I'm more responsive, will that mean the sale comes through? Will that mean the money lands in my bank account faster? Not always. Now, I'll get into velocity in just a second, but let me simply say this. There is one aspect of velocity that I definitely recommend you focus on if you want to increase the momentum of the results in your business, your life, whatever it is. We'll get to that in 2 seconds. First, let me address the mass piece, because to be real frank with you, I think this is the area that if more people put the emphasis on their focus, their time, their energy, their life force, they would actually see and enjoy the results faster. And that is not velocity, it's actually the mass of their efforts. Now, in some cases, depending on you, depending on your circumstances, depending on your situation, depending on the mission that you are achieving or working toward, mass might mean more. It might mean that you do need to do more work. You need to make more sales calls. You need to put more content out there. Maybe it means you do work out 5 days a week as opposed to once. Maybe it means you do a date night more than once a year. to increase your relationship. Maybe there is value in doing more. But we have to be careful to think that that is the cookie cutter approach to success. More is better. That's what the whole hustle your face off culture created disastrous wreckage in its wake over these past decade and a half or 2 decades, is this concept that more is better. Maybe it is. And this is the part where you have to go back and use the critical thinking skills that we talk about so much here with the True Driven. Is that actually true for you? Does that mean that doing more work is going to help you break the inertia? Maybe, probably. If you're doing 0, then anything more than 0 is going to naturally qualify as more, right? So yes, you may need to do more work. You may need to put more effort in. But sometimes it's not about more effort. It's about better, more effective effort. Maybe instead of making 55 sales calls, you'd make 5, do an evaluation on what's working, what's not working, and what needs to be tweaked, and then apply that new knowledge to doing better calls. For instance, maybe it means you only did 5 calls, but you need to do 5 reach outs or 5 follow-ups from those sales calls, for instance. This isn't a sales brief, but I'm just using that as an example. The same thing could be true instead of doing a 3-hour workout. Maybe it's just 30 intense minutes of working out 5 days a week or 3 days a week, as opposed to 1 3-hour burner once a week. It's not always about more, but a lot of times when we talk about mass, and yes, I am referring to the mathematical equation for linear momentum. When we talk about mass, it's not just about doing more. Sometimes it is. And that's the part where you have to be willing to step back and ask yourself, am I doing enough? Now be careful. It's not a question of if you are enough. The question is, does the mission require more of you? In other words, are you putting in 50 cents worth of work for $1 million dream? We got to ask ourselves that and be very, very critically thinking and be pragmatic about the answer to that question. Maybe we've got to get a third party, perspective on this, asking a mentor or coach, somebody who's got the experience that we may lack, or maybe we don't lack that. We just need a different perspective because we cannot see the forest for the trees. It happens a lot. The point here is that our mass of our efforts, the mass of what we're doing on a daily basis, may or may not match what is required to achieve the mission. So if you're wanting to build momentum in your business, your career, your life, your fitness, your health, your relationships, whatever the area of emphasis is for you, really looking at those 2 things, mass and velocity, are going to help you build that momentum. But you do have to be able to think critically and be able to kind of detach yourself and your ego from the process and from the results to get clear on whether or not it is an increase in effort or if it's an increase in the quality of the effort. The whole point here is that if we can take a look at these things and be able to give ourselves an evaluation, we can then apply better effort. We can probably downscale some of the things we're doing that aren't working and likely get there faster. But let's talk about speed for just a second. In this case, velocity. Velocity is that application of force in a specific direction. So it's not just about moving fast. It's just about moving in the direction we want to go much more efficiently. And as it applies to our business, as it applies to our missions in life, whatever that thing might be for you right now, the question is, how much time do you waste between inspiration and action? How much time do you take to deliberate and think about things as opposed to jumping straight into the action of doing the thing? That's the real question that we have to constantly challenge ourselves with, because if we come up with a great idea, step back, do some basic planning, do some basic outlining, and then make a plan to jump into action, but we don't actually do the action taking piece, then it doesn't really matter what our mass of effort would look like. It's about the time between inspiration the time between idea and the actual application of the idea. The tighter we can make, the shorter we can make that gap in time, that's where we will actually increase the velocity. Meaning, waste less time, overthink less, obsess less, procrastinate less, all of these things. So many people, it drives me nuts, and I'm sure it drives you guys nuts too, how we overthink ourselves out of action. It's not just thinking ourselves out, we overthink ourselves. Like, we know what we need to do. And sometimes it just comes down to maybe even a coin flip. But at the very least, being willing to take a risk on ourselves, being willing to figure things out as we go. There's a great example of this. Again, going back to physics, if you think about this, walking is a being of unbalancedness. Like, you're not balanced. You're actually out of balance if you're going to walk forward or run. Your body is constantly trying to catch up with itself. And the only way you can make forward progress in walking is by being out of balance. When you're perfectly stopped, you're still not perfectly in balance. If you're standing still, your inner ear is sensing your lack of balance. Your brain is sending little impulses to all those little micro muscles inside your body, inside your spine, and all the different parts of your muscle structure to keep you standing more or less upright, even if you're just standing still. So you're not perfectly in balance even then. But if you're making forward progress, if you are making forward momentum, you are 100% not in balance. And so this idea of having to have things figured out, having all the I's dotted, all the T's crossed, all the answers, everything figured out before you take action is absurd. It goes back to what we were talking about in the previous episode about the difference between amateurs and professionals. A professional is not going to stand around fucking off trying to figure out what all the right answers are before they get going. They just don't, most professionals don't have that kind of patience anyway. They hold themselves to too high of a standard to sit there and overthink and obsess over the small minutia. Velocity, as it applies to momentum, is critical. And what we're talking about is not speed. We're not talking about the speed of result. We're talking about the ability to act even in the face of fear, even in the face of confusion, even in the face of chaos, even in the face of frustration, particularly in the face of frustration. The ability to take a well thought out action without overthinking it, without obsessing. The ability to have an inspirational thought and act upon it in the shortest amount of time possible. Now, I am not talking about being impulsive. I am not talking about being knee-jerk reaction to everything. Ooh, I had a great idea. I'm going to do that. Because pretty soon, I think we can all get this. You're going to be one of those people chasing squirrels. That's not leadership either, nor is that being driven. To be truly driven means you do not have to wait for an outside force to act upon you to break your inertia. What it means is that you will find what you truly stand for with your values, your vision, your mission, and a sense of purpose, and apply as much effort to that as you can with the best skills and knowledge that you have at the time. Not waiting for somebody to give you permission to do it. Not waiting for somebody to outline the best ways to do it. Yes, it's important to seek out knowledge. Yes, it's important to derive and develop skills. Yes, it's important to have that support from mentors or from team members or from whomever you might need to help you accomplish the mission. 100% yes. But all of those things happen through taking imperfect action. And that's really where momentum is built. The mass of your actions, but also the velocity, meaning the speed with which you can take the actions after creating the idea and the plan to do so. Look, you have everything you need to accomplish anything you want right now. I've said that in my book, Flight Plan to Success. And what I meant by that is that you are good enough, strong enough, capable enough to do the things you know you need to do. The real question is, are you going to get the fuck out of your own way and do it? Or are you going to sit there spinning your wheels, obsessing and overthinking? That's not the act of a professional. That's not the act of a true driven. That's not the act of a leader. The behavior of a leader is to be able to recognize if they are inert, if they've hit inertia, or they're starting to slow down, they're starting to lose momentum. Maybe you're not flatlined. Hopefully you're not. At this point, hopefully you're not. But if you are, if you have found yourself in one of those rare chapters of life where you are feeling flatlined, you are feeling stuck, stagnated, or stalled out, then please understand this. It's okay. It's not okay to stay there. You have got to create the inner push, the inner impulse to break the inertia. Sometimes it's as simple, literally, as standing up, physically standing up, getting up out of the room you're in, the situation you're in, the environment you're in, and changing the scenery. Sometimes that's enough to literally break the inertia and to start building the momentum. Now you've actually hit that inert object, yourself, your physical body, with an outside force that actually was generated from within, i.e. being a true driven. Now we can start taking those steps because we're literally in an imbalanced state by walking. Riding a bike's the exact same way, by the way. The only way a bike can move forward is for it to be out of balance all the time. It's constantly out of balance. It's a fight for balance. That's what keeps the bike moving forward. That's what keeps you pedaling the bike, literally, is to keep that thing slightly out of balance. That's what keeps it forward moving. Walking, riding a bike, great metaphors for forward motion, forward momentum in our business and in our lives. We have to constantly be slightly out of balance, seeking balance, recognizing that we're never going to be 100% in balance. Sometimes you're going to have more weight in one area of your life. You're going to be putting a lot of effort into the mission. But once that mission has built that momentum, then you can pull back a little bit, being careful not to get too complacent, falling asleep at the wheel, getting lazy, or overlooking the important details that will come up and bite you in the ass and potentially derail you from accomplishing the mission. The biggest thing, my friend, is this. Look, if you're going through a tough time or a stuck time or a time where you feel a little bit stagnant, recognize that, hey, you're here. You're probably further along than you were before. Let's get ourselves back into forward motion. An object at rest will stay at rest until acted upon by an outside force. In this case, that outside force is not going to come from somewhere else or someone else. You have to generate that. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's coming to rescue your ass. You got to jump up and do it for yourself. Next, it's about applying more mass to your efforts. Mass meaning maybe it's more. Maybe you just need to do more work. Maybe you just need to put out more effort, more content, more sales calls, whatever the thing is. Maybe you just need to do more workouts. I don't know. That's where you have to get evaluative and ask yourself what is actually required. But likely it's either going to be more or it's going to be higher quality. Maybe it's time to refine what you're doing. Maybe it's about doing less but higher quality. That is an act of putting more mass. In this case, the mass of quality into what you're doing. And then, of course, the velocity. It really comes down to cutting that timeline from inspiration to action, from realization to tweaks and modifications. Sometimes that's all it takes for us to be able to make the more beneficial and efficient efforts toward getting the results we want. If you're looking to build momentum in your business, your career, and your life, it doesn't mean that you have to hustle your face off. Far from it. It doesn't mean that you're stuck here and this is as far as you'll ever go. In fact, that's a bullshit lie that you're listening to. Either you're telling yourself or something that's been tape recorded in your brain for as long as who knows. The point is this. It starts right now. The ability to shift the momentum comes from either creating more mass of your efforts, whether that means more effort in and of itself or more higher quality effort, and or likely both, cutting down the time that it takes for you to actually go from idea, impulse, or inspiration to action. That's velocity. It's simple. I know it sounds ridiculous using a high school physics lesson to try to teach you how to get out of your own way as an entrepreneur and as a leader. But think about it this way. That is actually linear momentum. Mass times velocity. And if you can take that think creatively and critically for yourself, and apply it to your business and life, you will create more momentum beginning right here, right now. If you're stuck, you don't have to stay stuck. That's a decision. It takes an outside impulse that comes from actually you, self-derived, self-created, self-owned, to get yourself off your ass, get yourself moving with the belief system and the energy state that says, I'm a fucking winner, I'm a leader, I will make this happen right here, right now, today. Beginning right here, right now, today. That's the act of a true driven. That's the act of a true leader. That's what you have inside you right now, inside your heart, inside your chest. You just gotta prove it to yourself. Get moving, build that momentum slowly or quickly, but either way, do it right now, do it today. And now is the time for us to get up off this fucking couch and make it happen. So if you're with me on this, throw it in the comments. I want to hear what you're doing right now to increase either the mass or the velocity in your efforts right now in your business, your life, your career. Let us know what's working for you. I want to see that in the comments. And remember, no matter what course you fly in life, fly high, fly fast, fly far, stay driven.